Everybody can be a philosopher or the interlocutor of a philosopher. But it is not true that every opinion is equivalent to another. The axiom of equality of mind is far from being an axiom of equality of opinions. From the beginning of philosophy, with Plato, we must distinguish, firstly, between correct opinions and incorrect opinions, secondly, between opinion and truth. Since the ultimate goal of philosophy is to clarify completely the distinction between truth and opinion, then there can obviously be no real acceptation by philosophy of the great democratic principle of the freedom of opinions. If an opinion is the exact opposite of a truth, it cannot enjoy that sort of freedom. Even in the Western countries, the democratic state, in fact, does not tolerate all opinions. For example, in France, the negation of the reality of the destruction of the Jews by the Nazis is not in the field of the freedom of opinions. There is a law which forbids to defend publicly such an opinion. More generally, philosophy opposes the unity and the universality of truth to the plurality and the relativity of opinions. There is another reason that limits the democratic trend of philosophy. Philosophy is certainly exposed to the critical judgment of others. But this exposition implies a common acceptation of a rule for the discussion. We have to recognize the validity of arguments. And finally, we have to accept the existence of a universal logic as a formal condition for the axiom of equality of minds. It's, in a metaphoric sense, the mathematical dimension of philosophy. There is a freedom of address, but there is also the necessity of a strict common rule for the discussion. Exactly like mathematics, philosophy is from everybody and for everybody. It has no specific language, but there is a strict rule for consequences. So when philosophy examines politics, it cannot, to begin with, be along the line of pure freedom, and certainly not of freedom of opinions. It deals with the question, what could be a political truth? Or, what is politics when it obeys the following two principles? First, compatibility with the philosophical principle of the equality of minds. Second, compatibility with the philosophical principle of the subordination of the variety of opinions to the universality of truth. So equality and universality are the characteristics of valid politics in the field of philosophy. The classical name for it is justice. In justice, equality is much more important than liberty. And universality is much more important than particularity, identity, or individuality. That is why there is a problem in the common definition of democracy as individual liberties. Richard Rorty has declared, I quote him, democracy is more important than philosophy. With this political principle, which is a political principle, Rorty prepares, in fact, the dissolution of philosophy in the cultural relativism. We have to note that Plato, at the very beginning of philosophy, says exactly the contrary. Philosophy is much more important than democracy. And if justice is the philosophical name for politics as a collective truth, is justice is that sort of name, politics as a collective truth, justice is more important than freedom. The Greek critique of democratic politics in Plato is slightly ambiguous. On one side, it is certainly an aristocratic personal position. But on the other side, it's a real problem. The problem of a kind of organic contradiction between justice and freedom. After all, it is our situation today. The price for our freedom here in the Western world is a monstrous inequality. First, inside our countries, but above all, outside our countries. Philosophically speaking, there is no justice at all in the contemporary world, and maybe this absence of justice is the price we have to pay for freedom. We have obviously a paradoxical situation. Democracy is a condition for philosophy, but democracy has no direct relation to justice. And justice is the philosophical name for truth in the political field. So the relationship of the three terms, democracy, politics, philosophy, remains obscure, as you can see in my first diagram, the diagram 1 that you have. We can see on this diagram that democracy is a condition for philosophy, then that philosophy determines a new concept of politics, and that finally, between the new concept of politics and the common concept of democracy, there is no easy, direct communication because the complexity of the concept of truth. We have here to make a detour, a classical detour by mathematics. Mathematics is probably the best paradigm of justice, as Plato very early pointed out. In mathematics, we have first a kind of primitive freedom, which is the freedom of the choice of axioms. But after that, we have a complete determination along some logical rules. So we have solely to accept the consequences of our first choice. And this acceptation is not freedom, but constraint, necessity, hard intellectual work to find the correct proof.